So I want to talk about the skirmish in the Middle East a little bit. Now, there are a lot of shows covering this in way deeper, better fashion than me. So the best I can do is show some clips of stuff that I've come across that I think is good. And Dave Smith has just been on a rampage recently. I don't know if you saw, there was a monk debate between Douglas Murray and Mehdi Hassan and some other people about the skirmish in the Middle East. And, it was widely agreed to on social media that Douglas Murray and the, pro-empire side kind of won the debate. And so a lot of people, Dave Smith has been just dismantling people in debates for the last 6 months. And so people keep coming at him like, oh, Douglas Murray is going to own you or whatever. So I think Dave Smith has actually reached out to have a debate with Douglas Murray, and I hope I get to see that. But let's just watch him take apart some of the more silly things that Murray says. And I can't ever watch these debates and take these people seriously because so many of them are just reciting nonsense. But watch this.
They're going to take an opinion on it because I haven't seen the whole thing. But just watching Douglas Murray's opening statement and his first rebuttal was just I don't know, almost everything the guy's saying is just so ridiculous. And so I just figured, well, why not go through it on today's show, since this is a new thing that's kind of going viral, and we could talk about it. Now, just to set the stage for this here, one of the things that's kind of interesting about this debate, at least to me, is that the topic of the debate was not the history of Israel and Palestine. It wasn't whether Israel is an apartheid state. It wasn't whether Israel is just or unjust in prosecuting this military campaign over the last 8 or 9 months or whatever it's been.
It was whether or not showing images of the war zone is considered pornography, Candace Owens. That needs to be censored.
The topic of the debate was, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitic? So it was, is it anti-Semitic to oppose Zionism? Which, I don't even understand how that is possibly a debatable topic. It's such a ridiculous claim to say that there's a political movement that it is racist to oppose. By definition, you should never be allowed to say that. As soon as anyone gets into the realm of politics or a nationalistic movement, you've forfeited the right to say you're a bigot if you're opposed to this, right?
Logic, reason, rare logic and reason. Thank you, Dave.
That would just seem so common sense to me. But anyway,
and how do you possibly treat Jews who are anti-Zionists? So they're people then Jewish.
The thing I love about this debate too, just to take a quick sidebar here, is how it's exposed people who used to be famous for being rational, logical thinkers like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. This debate has exposed that they are frauds. They're not rational, logical thinkers. They're just as emotionally triggered as the people that they want to criticize on the quote unquote left.
Anti-Semites?
They're anti-Semites. Yes. That is the answer. That is, I haven't watched the full debate, but I've gotten enough. I've gotten enough to hear that from Douglas Murray. Yes, the answer is that me and you are also anti-Semites, and every other Jew who's out criticizing Israel for that's it. If you think that, whatever, if you think the way Israel treats the Palestinian people is wrong, the only answer is that you hate Barry the dentist. That's the level of argument that you have to deal with to even make it. It's too absurd.
And so he already pretty much dismantled Douglas Murray's entire thesis right there with his intro, but let's keep going.
Anyway, I feel like, and forget even I will grant that Douglas Murray he's talented at what he does, and he's got verbal abilities and stuff like that.
Snooty Brit.
Yes, he's got
all incumbents pitching me bobbins. He's being diplomatic here.
That snooty Brit thing going for him. But forget even that of who's better at the sport of debate, just for the sake of taking these ideas apart and demonstrating how profoundly weak they all are. I figured we'd do that. And also I do think that, seeing as how it's a very important thing going on in the world right now, it's not just that Israel is involved in this like mass slaughter campaign against the Palestinians, but it's also the fact that I think for anybody being honest with themselves who is at all educated on the topic, you know, Israel has a very unique relationship with the United States of America, and let's say has a fair bit of influence over our foreign policy. And so it's
also being very diplomatic.
Kind of important for people like us who, let's say, passionately oppose U.S. foreign policy, particularly over the last 20 plus years, to deal with this issue. So anyway, we can start it here with let's start with Douglas Murray's opening statement from the other day at the Monk debates.
Let's watch what Douglas Adams here has to. Sorry, for the record, nerds, I've probably misspoke before and called this guy Douglas Adams, who's like arguably one of the greatest American writers who wrote. I don't actually. Sorry, he's not even American. I think he's British, but he wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So my apologies, nerds. Not Douglas Adams. Douglas Murray here. Enjoy this.
Rudyard, it's a great pleasure to be back at the Monk debates. When I was last here a couple of years ago, I just returned from the front line of the war in Ukraine, where I was with the Ukrainian armed forces. And for most of the last 8 months, I've been in Israel and Gaza following the war.
So this guy is a very consistent NATO stan, pro-war stooge, basically, is what he just told you.
There, as closely as I can. And I won't go into all the details now that I could give you of what's happening. But I would just put it in perspective in this way, first of all. What happened on the 7th of October was not just a massive attack on innocent people inside Israel. It was the equivalent.
South Park did a joke episode a while back where they made fun of this country singer who kept saying, it's like 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Now you have the same dynamic. It just goes, October 7, October 7. It's our excuse for anything we do. It's October 7, the new excuse.
To about 6,000 Canadians being massacred and burned in their homes in one day. It's the equivalent of about 1,500 of your fellow Canadians being taken hostage.
Okay.
You know,
this is already a very emotional argument. The equivalent of the, I mean, he uses, hopefully he used some kind of math there, but he's basically inflating the numbers by saying this is the equivalent of thousands of people dying in Canada.
you would have thought after an attack like the one that Hamas instigated, that started this terrible war, you would have thought that there would be some sympathy for the world, from the world. You might have thought the world would pay attention to the attack and at least pay attention to the people behind it. You might have expected, like me, that there might have been a worldwide opposition to the terrorists and rapists and murderers of Hamas.
Call me crazy, but I believe there was actually. There was a very large outpouring of grief and sympathy at the time. I don't know where you were. Maybe you had your head buried deep inside your own asshole, but it did happen.
You might have thought there would be hatred around the world erupting, that the government of Qatar and its mouthpiece, Al Jazeera, its funding of Hamas.
Here we go. The freedom of speech guy advocating that a media outlet that reports critically is an arm of a terrorist organization, so it needs to be shut down.
And its hosting of the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. You might have thought there'd have been an outpouring of rage at the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Tehran, but no. There was an immediate outpouring of rage against the state that had been attacked.
All right, let's pause it right here. Let's just go through some of this.
When does Harry Potter show up?
He's doing everything he can.
Let me just add too that Douglas Murray sounds like a Disney villain. Like literally, he sounds like every bad guy in every Disney, like Shere Khan in the Jungle Book. Yes, yeah. Like Scar. Yes, we will get these simpletons, won't we? We will advocate for war and be disingenuous about our support of free speech.
And to summon him, that's for sure. So look, on the first note that, last time I was here, I had just gotten back from Ukraine. It's like, yeah, that's right. And you got that war completely wrong also. He's one of the people who went to Ukraine and then said, look, if we arm them, they can win. I don't know how clear he was on what his definition of winning was, but he was wrong on that one. And he's wrong on this one too. And of course,
I'm willing to bet that he was an advocate for the Iraq and Afghanistan invasions too. That's the other thing that blows me away about what's going on with like Ukraine is the Afghanistan thing. I'm like, yo, we just had 20 years of this shit and you guys are back on board for it again? We fought Russia in a proxy war in Afghanistan in the 80s already and it ended badly. What makes you think this is going to be different?
It's kind of interesting to start this thing with a big, appeal to emotion, which is reasonable enough that obviously talking about October 7th was a truly horrific event. And so you're going to work up some sympathy from that, understandably. It would make sense if like this debate was happening on like October 25th. Or even November 10th, maybe even into December. But, like the first thing, at least that just pops out in my mind is that when you sit here and you go, look how many people were killed on October 7th and think about the proportion of what that would be in Canada, that would be as if however many Canadians were killed, right? Which is, again, I never exactly liked the logic of that, like somehow killing...
It also gives you an opportunity to inflate the numbers. That's why he did that, because it makes it look, and it's tragic. Like, I'm not denying that it was bad or that, the innocent people died, but people who are advocates for this and stalwarts want to start history from that point and ignore everything that happened before it. And that's just unfair and frankly, intellectually dishonest.
Like if there's a family of 6 next door and there's a family of 2 here, killing one person in the family of 2 isn't like way worse than killing one person in the family of 6 because there's a smaller family. So I don't like the argument that like the proportion somehow indicates something.
It's a disingenuous argument to begin with.
I think that's kind of missing the mark. But the thing that jumps out at you right away is that, well, look, the population of Gaza is much smaller than the population of Israel. And by any count, by anyone's count, more innocent civilians have been killed in Gaza by multiple factors. You know what I mean? Like by orders of magnitude, more innocent people have been killed in Gaza than were killed on October 7th in Israel. So it's just a little bit odd to start out with this like, oh, this would be like, even though it was 1,200 people killed or 1,400 people killed, this would be like, whatever, 50,000 Canadians killed or something like that. It's like, yeah, well, if you take the war in Gaza, you're going to get to a much higher number than that. So to start, doesn't work.
So that's a great point too, because the flip side of that argument is even worse.
Aside from that, this idea of almost like creating this parallel reality where Douglas Murray is going to say, you would think after something like October 7th, the world would condemn Hamas. You would think that would happen, right? At a minimum. And that almost kind of sounds compelling in a way until you like just stop for a second and rub 2 brain cells together and go, oh yeah, and they did. They totally did. What world are you living in? What world are you living in where Hamas was not condemned? Now you could say not every single person in the world condemned Hamas. It's
so analogous to 9/11 too. Like the situation is so analogous. Like after 9/11, we had the world on our side, regardless of what you believe about the veracity of the official story, because I definitely have some doubts. But the United States as a country had the world behind us, and then we went and invaded Iraq and kind of ruined it, right? So it's the same principle here. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but a couple months ago, maybe, Trump said something to the effect of, we need to end this war because it's making Israel look bad. It's making them look bad on the world stage, which is 1000% accurate and goes back to the whole adults in the room thing. It's like, that is just a verifiable truth that anyone who's thinking strategically would bring to the table. But let's keep going.
That you can find extremist voices, perhaps, who didn't, but by and large, to sum up the reaction, dude, to this day, we're talking 8-9 months later of this brutal military campaign that's been carried out, and that again has killed far, far more innocent people than were killed on October 7th. Still, the first thing, I swear, every goddamn show that I'm on, every debate that I've done, everything, you always get asked, do you condemn Hamas? You always, of course, have to first and foremost say, yes, we condemn Hamas. What happened on October 7th was wrong. Now can we get into the thing that we're here to debate? You know, like it's, and the fact is that the powerful institutions around the world were unanimous on condemning October 7th and condemning Hamas. So that one is just, again, it's like one of those things where it's like you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. It's just factually not true that there was an absence of a condemnation of Hamas. That's just not true. He then immediately.
And so I want to take a little sidebar here, because this is typical in a lot of these debates. And I've made this analogy before, but this is what happens when you debate people about guns. I'm not against guns. I don't think you could, like I've said it earlier in this stream, I don't think you could ever rid the United States of guns. You couldn't. Even if it was made completely illegal and banned, people would still have them. That's a reality. Criminals would still have guns. People would disobey the law. And you shouldn't be a criminal just for having a gun. But what happens is when you say, hey, we should have like maybe be more accountable, more stronger regulations on guns, make the bar a little bit higher for, people that want to get a weapon that you can quickly murder a lot of people with. As soon as you bring that up, you get this response that's like, oh, you can't ban all guns. It's like, no, I didn't say that. So right out of a gate here, Murray is using a straw man argument the premise of his entire argument rests on this debate that is based on a falsehood, which is, you just have to basically be a believer to think that he won this debate or had any valid points to make.
He pivots to why there wasn't a condemnation of Qatar. Again, I think that there certainly was condemnation of Hamas. Much of Hamas's political leadership lives in Qatar. So, okay. But, it does kind of raise an interesting question there. Qatar is an ally of the United States of America, and maybe not technically an ally of Israel, but wink, wink, nod, nod, totally an ally of Israel. And this is why Benjamin Netanyahu can send the head of Mossad 2 weeks before October 7th to Qatar to make sure that the funds keep going to Hamas, because that was the plan, to prop up Hamas so you never have to give the Palestinians their own state. So it just seems like by the same logic he's using here, like if we do want to condemn Qatar, shouldn't we also kind of look at the fact that this is a country that has let's say, a working relationship with the United States of America and Israel? And not only was there not, let's say pre-October 7th, not only was there not pressure on Qatar to stop funding Hamas, as has been reported in the New York Times and many newspapers in Israel, there was actually pressure on them to continue. So I'm just saying that you might ask yourself those questions also, just following this same line of logic. Then he throws in condemning Iran, which is kind of like, okay, but it's never been, perhaps the reason for that is that there's never been any evidence that demonstrates that Iran was connected or involved with October 7th specifically. The other thing here that obviously Douglas Murray is
So, and what conservatives are doing right now is they're arguing that because Joe Biden allowed some assets of Iran to be unfrozen, that he supports Hamas somehow, even though he's taken over $11 million from AIPAC over his career in politics. So it's just completely disingenuous. Let me let him finish up a little bit here, and then we'll move on.
leaving out, and this might be part of what the reaction that he's talking about to October 7th is that, October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. And it's almost like all of these guys it's like their entire case rests on acting like this was Canada and the United States of America or something like that. These were just two sovereign nations who happened to be living next to each other. And then a bunch of people, what's your camera's acting weird there.
By the way, it's the same dynamic with the other skirmish the United States is involved in. Everything started in 2022. There's no history you need to know before that. You can't listen. You're not allowed to hear what Putin or the Russians have to say. You're not allowed to hear any of that. Just know that everything started from this point that we're dramatizing in the press, and that's it.
All right, whatever. Let's keep going. They act as if these were two sovereign nations living next to each other, and then one day, for no reason, these savages just attacked from this neighboring country. Like everything was cool until then or something. But of course, anyone who knows anything about this just knows that's not the case. And the reality is that these things are never perfect. And I know everyone tries to jump on these examples and, say, well, that's not exactly literally true. But if what is conjured up in your mind is like two sovereign states living side by side, and then one just decided to attack the other group because they just hate those people so much. They're so barbaric and so backward and so primitive and so evil. And they just hate those people for being those people, their immutable characteristics or the religion that they practice or their genetic heritage or something.
It's the whole narrative is identical to what happened after 9/11.
Like that. So they attacked and killed them. But a much closer analogy would be like a bunch of people in the toughest gang in a prison broke out of that prison and went on a killing rampage and took a bunch of hostages. Now, again, people will say like, well, Gaza's not a literal prison and there's differences between a prison that is okay. The people in Gaza have been dominated by the Israelis for longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. There's over 1 million people who were born into that. Substantially more than that, probably, but certainly the 1 million people who are 18 and under in Gaza, all of them have just been born into this. Now, is Israel, after the creation of the state of Israel, created the refugee problem that drove so many people into Gaza? They won a war against Egypt and Jordan in 1967 and occupied the Palestinian territory ever since. Now, they will say that they pulled out in 2005, and you can go read some Dov Weissglass quotes to see what that was really all about. As Sharon's top advisor put it, it was to put the peace process in formaldehyde. But even after what they called the disengagement, even after 2005, Israel since then has maintained complete control over Gaza. I mean, down to like whether they're allowed to come and go, whether they're allowed to have an airport, which they're not, whether they're allowed to have a seaport, how far they can fish off the coast, how much they can trade with the world, whether they're allowed to have potato chips or cookies or all types of stuff, like every detail. Their tax revenue is collected by Israel. Like Israel rules the Gaza Strip and has since 1967. And the thing about people is that they don't much like being ruled by foreign militaries. And so, yes, this is a dynamic. It's not as if one group of people, or even as people like Douglas Murray won't exactly say, but will seem to imply that it's kind of the same as the Nazis attacking the Jews. Like as if there's a parallel between the ruling government attacking a helpless people and a helpless people lashing out at the people of a ruling government. Not saying either's okay, but they're definitely different. That might be part of why the world reacted the way it did. Anything you want to add, Rob, or you want to keep playing?
I agree with everything you said. And he's playing a real dirty trick when he goes, the entire world didn't condemn this, because we did until Israel took it as an opportunity to kill innocent civilians. And then as that continues to happen, everyone went, hey, you can't do that. So to pretend like people weren't outraged over what happened, or even us at the time going, hey, you had an opportunity here where the world was on your side and now you're blowing it by killing innocent civilians and destroying their homes. So, yeah, we would all just be talking about how outrageous what Hamas did to this very day if Israel did not take it as, oh, look, this is our ticket to go kill innocent civilians.
And that's a great point right there.